that we send out the notice are here and be able to speak. So welcome to the July edition of the Inglewood Neighborhood Association. We'll go through a couple of our preliminary. Sergeant Fisher is here from the East Precinct. Suzanne Robinson's here from the library. Then I'll turn it over to Emily, who will kind of give us updates in general on the 7th district, and then she can continue and introduce Representative Dave Rosenberg from the 35th district, and we can get into BL 2019-48 and talk about that for as long as people want to talk about that. But first of all, welcome Sergeant Fisher, and if you'll kind of give us an update of what's going on in the East Precinct in Inglewood, we would appreciate it.
You're still muted, Sergeant.
Yeah, sorry, you're still muted.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Excellent. Technology issues. So yeah, you've got a light report. Again, the crime analyst pulled your so for the last 30 days, looks like you only had a total of 7 incidents. Over half of that's going to be theft. You had 2 violent crimes, 2 aggravated assaults. One of these, and it's kind of outside the Inglewood boundaries, because I still put the data in here for Baxter Heights, because I know some of the Baxter folks come over. This is that group home right there at the corner of Hart Lane and Saunders. And like right there in the corner, it's kind of like, it looks like commercial buildings. It's a group home for mental health clients. And there was some kind of a dispute there. Somebody picked up a art sign, like a political sign, and smacked the other one with it. So technically it was considered an aggravated assault, but there was no prosecution. So as aggravated assaults goes, that's quite on the minor end. The domestic related aggravated assault that you had, this one was, it was a serious assault. However, the victim in this case only knows this partner by a nickname. So we're having difficulty with prosecution on that one. Then past that, a handful of minor thefts. One of them, it's a minor theft inside of a house, but this is an acquaintance that was visiting over on Howard, and the victim was just pretty sure that their friend in quotes, who came over to visit, stole some cash from them. The other one was the laundromat there in the 3600 block of Gallatin. They left their clothes unattended and somebody helped themselves to them. Shoplifting at Walgreens, shoplifting at Sinkers. You did have 1 porch package theft, but that's over on Saunders, outside Inglewood in the Baxter area. Locked car, and they just stole and then there was over on Tanglewood Drive in the 4700 block. This one, there was no damage either, but they also had their wallet and their passport in the car, and some keys. Then you had, looks like the biggest category actually is vehicle theft. Let's see if this is, hold on just a second. Let me look at this theft where they stole the keys. If that's gonna, nope. But 1 block up from the theft at the 4700 block in Tanglewood, on the 4800 block at Tanglewood, they had their 2007 Lexus stolen, but they swore up and down it was locked and no keys were left inside. But you don't hotwire a brand new Lexus unless it was taken with a tow truck. The other 2 were over on Baxter and Burris, so again, across Gallatin Road. Sounds like a lot of the incidents, I've got my data pack here, at least close to half are actually across Gallatin in the Baxter Heights area. Inglewood's been fairly quiet. Overall, we've seen an uptick in violent crime in East. Obviously, we had the recent homicide down in River Chase. Detectives have got some substantial leads on that based on some vehicle info that we've got. But your little corner of the area is kind of Has anybody had any specific issues, questions, concerns they need to throw our way?
I don't know if the the person was on. It was on Facebook earlier last week, and I invited him to this meeting about a untagged speeding car, I think on straightaway. Yep. Okay. And
it was over there. The driver ended up pulling into their house on Duggar. I believe the speeding video that got quite a lot of attention on social media was over on Sheridan. So actually been working on this a lot this week because boy, did I get the emails and the video was horrendous. There's no doubt. So yeah, one of the frustrating aspects of that was that it was kind of thrown out there that when the police contacted the initial complainant, they said, hey, what would you like us to do? And I think that's grossly misinterpreted because a video of a car speeding by with tinted windows where you can't see the driver, we can't prosecute that. But if somebody knows who the driver is and is a witness, we can assist them with the prosecution. Now, it's totally understandable that witnesses in the neighborhood that I reached out to were not comfortable with prosecuting because the guy lives right around the corner. Because one of the witnesses followed him around the corner and sure enough gave us the name, info, and that was all out in social media too. So here's what we did. You got a whole bunch of the police don't want to do anything. That's just more reason to defund them and blah, 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 hashtag, yak, yak, yak. The commander and I both went to that house today and we spoke with that guy and his mother. We advised him that, as of right now, nobody wanted to prosecute. He almost started crying because when the police showed up, he thought we had a warrant for him. And then we explained to him, look, we're also getting a lot of other information about him that, again, he's got substance abuse issues. We offered him assistance with getting him linked into resources that can help with the substance abuse. And so we actually we gave him both our work cell phone numbers. We were contacted by him and his mother later in the day that, they want to reach out and help coordinate and get this guy some help. He did crash his car later that night, the same night that video was taken. So yeah, we're working as we always have from a bunch of different angles to solve this problem and hopefully stop the speeding issue from this specific subject in the neighborhood, and also get him social resources to help with the other issues that he's battling.
Any other questions for Sergeant Fisher? Thank you very much.
You got it.
Here.
Thanks.
We'll see y'all next time.
Okay, thank you. Suzanne, has anything changed from the library? I know the Madison Library is the closest one, semi-functional to us now. Anything on that line change?
No change there.
Okay.
We're still doing curbside holds.
Okay.
And we are also doing virtual readers advisory. We have a form on our website where you can fill out and request suggestions for things to read.
Okay.
Summer Challenge is in its 11th week. Currently, the Inglewood Library is at 309,500 minutes. Our goal is 825,000 minutes. We need lots of readers. There's going to be a Friday family time program on the library's YouTube channel tomorrow at noon with Rachel Rodriguez. She's a children's musician who does bilingual story times. The citywide goal for Summer Challenge, by the way, is 20 million minutes, and we're a little over 7 million at this point. But that's really all the information that I have. There are no dates coming down the pike that we're aware of as far as what the next phase will be.
I'm sure you'll share those with us when that happens.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your update. Emily, I'm going.
Rod, I have a question from Ms. Robinson.
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Bond.
Do audiobooks count as minutes, or do you have to sit down and turn pages?
Absolutely, they count. Magazines count. Newspapers count. If you're reading, it counts.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay.
I get a lot of audiobooks read in the car.
Counts. Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you now as far as just the general information on the 7th District updates, and then you and Representative Rosenberg can present however you want to the bill that we're discussing tonight. And so it's in your capable hands.
Thank you, Rod. I'm not sure how capable mine are as compared to yours. You've been managing this Zoom business here for, gosh, I guess 3 months we've been doing this. So thank you so much for hosting it this way. I can't wait till we get back together because I mainly miss the pizza in addition to being in person. I'm kidding. I miss the people too. So I thought that I'd start with the budget, right? So I sent out an email to everybody the day of the vote and explained where I was with that. That's exactly where we landed. Just a quick recap of that is that our current tax rate has been $3.15. That is the lowest in the history of the city. The mayor proposed a $1 increase, so that would have taken it to $4.15. The chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, of which I sit on, proposed another 6.5 cents on top of that, which ended up being the budget that got passed. There were, of the 40 of us, 32 voted in favor of the substitute budget and 8 people voted against. The 8 folks who voted against basically were voting for the mayor's budget. So no matter what, we were looking at a significant tax increase. I think, I know that everybody within District 7 last year, everybody who ran spoke about the need for a tax rate correction. And that ended up where we are, where we got. But a number of great highlights about the budget. And first of all, let me back up. It's definitely a tough pill to swallow for everybody. We're talking about on average about $50 a month, $650 or $700 a year. So that's something that weighed heavy on all of my colleagues as well as me. But it also is something that the mayor and the council called a crisis budget. We really have not done well in managing our tax revenue over the past few years. And I think, as my predecessor said, and as the lead or one of the co-sponsors of the past 2 budget proposals that included a tax increase, I think we all in this district in particular were aware of the need to do so to keep services going for the city. A couple of good highlights about what we're doing is that we've included a number of initiatives that help our youth, that help our educators and the staff within MNPS. We're going to have a new chief diversity officer, which will help us with small businesses who really need help more now than ever. We have a Veterans Affairs liaison now that will be put in place for, I think that was around $60,000 a year. So not very significant, but at the same time, the impact that they'll have, again, will connect us to veteran-owned businesses and help us do better with veterans throughout the city. And I think most importantly, one of the largest pieces that was in the budget was building up our savings account. We haven't talked about that much, I think, and today and we have roughly 2 days of cash on hand. So I don't want to put any fear in anybody, but hypothetically, if you're in your household and you have a couple of days savings on hand, a couple of days of operational budget savings on hand, that's not a very good situation to be in. And that really is one of the reasons why the comptroller came in and spoke with us and said, you need to do something to fix this. So the new budget allows us to get up to about 14 days of cash on hand. Of the top 25 cities in the country, the average is 4 months of cash on hand. And so we need to work towards that goal so that when we end up in a financial crisis like we're in right now, we need to make sure that the city can continue to provide the services that we all need. That's a bit of a budget update. I know there's a lot of questions. We covered that a lot last month, but I'm certainly able to do my best to answer any questions that you have on that. I want to touch on 3 other topics. One is COVID. We moved back into phase 2 today. Well, tonight at midnight, tomorrow. Our case count has been increasing far too much. I would recommend that everyone wear a mask. I was a part of the group. Dave was a part of the, Mr. Rosenberg, we were a part of the group that said, we really have to get into this mask compliance. Masks will help. Obviously, personal hygiene, washing your hands is great, but if you wear a mask everywhere that you go outside in public, that is a difference maker. We've seen it worldwide, and it will really help us get back to, we talk about opening up the economy. We talk about getting back to work. Wearing a mask is something that's proven across the world to help us get there. So please, please, please wear a mask whenever you're out and about. That really is the best defense to keep other people healthy as well as yourself. Ivy Drive has been a hot topic. Last month, actually 2 months ago, we talked about the development that had been proposed at the corner of Ivy Drive and Moss Rose. The prior developer whose application failed at the Planning Commission was proposing 31 units on a 9.5 acre, on 3 parcels that were 9.5 acres. There is a new developer that has purchased about 3 acres of that. So it's been split up. It's not being sold as a whole piece. He's bought about, and he's an East Nashville guy. Robbie Drimmer is his name. And he has been, very open about his plans. And I'm not sure exactly, what the support is in the community, but he's looking to build 8 properties on 1/2. Or on those 3 acres, which are the least invasive part of that lot. But that is coming up. I just throw it on your calendar for July the 23rd. I certainly would love to hear your feedback and can share more information as you'd like it about that. Certainly a large development for us. And along the lines of large developments, 1500 Porter Road, which is the corner of Porter and Cahal. That's where the Berkshire Place apartments are today. There's a proposal for a specific plan, an SP, that would remove the units that are there today and create a new mixed use development there. That is something that has just been released. I've had 2 conversations with the developers about it. My very first requirement from them was to talk with the people who live there today. These are Section 8 for the most part, apartments. And I want to make sure, the kids that live there go to Inglewood Elementary and Rosebank Elementary. And I want to make sure that we cause the least disruption as possible. So if you ask me if I had kids, if you asked me what it would be like to have my kid change schools and we move elsewhere around the city, we need to be empathic about what that means for the residents there. So the very first meeting that I've asked them to have is specifically with those residents. And subsequent to that, I'd like, we'll have the normal community engagement meetings, but I specifically want to hear from those residents to make sure their needs are met. Some upcoming bills, and I'll wrap up with this. I know I'm throwing a lot at you right now, but some upcoming bills that are going to be introduced next Tuesday. Well, one is on second reading, which is this is based on a lot of community feedback here in District 7. And my council members have concurred that it's an important thing, is changing construction hours to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Currently, developers, contractors can work from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. I don't think that's very neighborly. So looking to change that to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Looking to Carrie Rogers from our district was instrumental in helping write a bill that will be on first reading for personal delivery devices, which really is about drones delivering products. Basically, think about Amazon. Amazon really is the main company that wants to deliver items and use our sidewalks to do so. We've seen a lot of things like scooters on our sidewalks. We want to make sure that we're out in front and regulating how these devices will impact our community. And then, I don't know, if you haven't seen it yet today, you'll see it in the news. We announced today the second reading for the core civic. It's not core civic related, but I introduced a bill last January that would eliminate private prisons in Nashville. That bill is being reintroduced on Tuesday. Mr. Rosenberg is a co-sponsor of that bill since it was introduced last January. The sheriff supports this, and what we'll be able to do is, originally we thought it was going to cost Nashvillians. We've found out it won't cost us a dime. There may be a cost of at maximum $5 million to transition. $5 million is not nothing, but it's also on a $2.5 billion budget. It's not extremely significant, and we'll be able to get this profiteer out of Nashville and put your tax dollars back into Nashvillians as the result of that. So I'm the lead sponsor on that bill, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions about that, but I want to make sure that I'm available for any questions, not just now, but anytime. Rod, I probably took a little too long. I'll stop there and certainly open to questions, but I want to make sure we spend a lot of time on Dave's bill as well.
I think Matthew had something.
Emily, first, congratulations on the private prison thing. This is really great.
Thank you.
Also, is there a plan filed someplace about this 8 properties built on that one parcel on Ivy Drive?
Yeah.
Okay, so where do I find it?
That is, goodness gracious. It's been filed with planning. I can get the planning while Dave is talking in a minute. I will post, is the chat available?
It is.
All right, I'll post the bill number in the chat so that you can, sorry, not the bill number, the case number in the chat so you can look it up, including a link.
Oh, one more. It's changed to mixed use on 1500 Porter Road. Is there a date set for that discussion?
There's not. No dates have been set for any of it right now. It's really up to the developer. It's their timeline. Their plans include creating new housing for the residents who live there on a different site. Again, my opinion is I want to hear from the residents. What do they want? But their current idea is to build another site somewhere, which would take them about 2 years. And once those residents, if they choose to move there, then they'll move there. So that's 2 years from now, let's say. And then they'll begin to demolish what's there and build it up. So we're talking about probably 4 to 5 years for them to put something different in place. These folks have owned the land since the 90s, but they're looking for different, apparently from what they said, they have other investors that are going to work towards the new project. But, for me, the most important thing is, and I know that most people in East Nashville want to say, let's make sure these residents are represented. For me, what's most important is that the residents have their own voice. So I think, they are the ones who are going to be impacted more than even the people across the street. I want them to have their voice and to be heard. And the community is always, of course, welcome. Everything is open. But it's critical to me that we don't speak over or talk for the residents there. So the first meeting will be with the residents. It will be open air. It will be safe. We will be distanced. Everyone will wear a mask. But, we've got to make sure that happens. No dates. Back to the question, Matt, but I'm a little verbose, as Verbio says, and everyone knows.
Thank you, Emily.
All right, I'm going to look up that bill number. I guess I'll turn it over to Dave. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. You've been working on this bill for a long time. There's been a lot of changes to it, and I hope that the community gets a chance to understand what you've done and where we are with it. Rod, I'm turning it over if you're ready.
Sure. Take it away, Dave. Thank you very much for attending our meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Emily. I appreciate you having me. It's a much shorter drive than I remember, but it's great to be here. I represent parts of Bellevue, Anthony Davis's childhood home, and where his mother actually still lives, as a matter of fact. So I hear lots of great things about Inglewood. So I wanted to run through a little bit. Rod and Emily asked me to come and talk a little bit about BL 2019-48. Which looks to modify our home-based business laws that we have in place right now. This is a conversation that we've been having for quite a while, and it's become a little bit more acute as we've had more and more people working from home as of late. This bill has been discussed at length, and I appreciate the chance to kind of walk you through where the bill is now, because it's, like Emily said, it's undergone a lot of changes, and talk about some of the things that it does and doesn't do to really end up in a balanced place. So Nashville's current laws, this is our current home occupation law, and it allows businesses to operate in neighborhoods, but the way it does it is wholly unenforceable, and it's unfair the way it's written as well. It's Title 17, Chapter 16, Section 250 of the Metro Code, and it says home occupations shall be conducted in a dwelling unit. I'm not going to read this whole thing, I promise. Just hitting some highlights. Conducted in a dwelling unit or accessory building by one or more occupants of the dwelling unit. No clients or patrons may be served on the property. No more than one part-time or full-time employee not living within the dwelling may live there. It also limits things like square footage and signage and structural alterations, and we'll get into that a bit. It also says that if you run your business from home, even if you're just sitting at your computer all day, you have to go to the codes department, give them a layout of your home, mark which parts will be used for business, and then pay for a permit. And when you look at our peer cities, this is pretty rare. You find laws that aren't this simplistic and that really kind of go into the things that really impact a business, a neighborhood, whether it's positively or negatively. So the bill that we have before us right now is Bill 2019-48. It's the second substitute. It's sponsored by Zach Young, Colby Sledge, Joy Stiles, Zolfat Swara, in addition to me. And the bill was introduced, and it's gained the support that it has for really a number of reasons. The current law is fundamentally unfair. It restricts homeowners from conducting non-invasive day-to-day activities, but more than that, it relies on this don't ask, don't tell approach, where everybody's kind of allowed to go along and do it with a wink and a nod until they get on the wrong side of the wrong person, or even have a competitor call and have them shut down to gain an advantage, and that's unfortunate. It's also, for the Nashvilleian trying to make ends meet by running a side gig while home from a full-time job, who's come to depend on that income. It's cruel to see your business shut down over a grudge or something like that, after you've been allowed to operate. And it does disproportionately impact female, veteran, minority-owned businesses. It's no secret that Nashville's cost of living has gone through the roof. We're having more and more people having trouble staying in their home, and they end up selling out to a developer to put multiple units on the property because that they can't afford to stay where they are. And this is an opportunity to help folks make ends meet. The proposal that we've got in front of us makes some changes, but most of the things that it does is tighten the restrictions that should be tightened. And it also releases so the burdens of the nonsensical ones, which I'll get into again. And lastly, this is a much more enforceable proposal than what we have on the books now, because our code staff is overworked, whether it's dealing with short-term rentals or the home occupation laws we have now, or property standards, or a litany of things. And this absolves them of going after things that are invisible businesses, basically, and let them focus on the bad actors. So here's where we are on the bill. It was first introduced last November. went to the Planning Commission for 2 public hearings. It had 2 public hearings at the Metro Council. We introduced a second version of the bill in January and the current version of the bill in early March, although it's also undergone some amendments to really tighten up the protections within it. There was an online town hall. It's undergone votes in front of our Budget and Finance Committee. Second reading, of course, at the council, and it had its second public hearing. The Planning and Zoning Committee discussed it along with the Codes Committee. We applied some additional amendments at our last council meeting before putting the bill off because it was 4:30 in the morning. And so and then we had a workshop on Monday that was put together by our planning committee where we discussed a couple more last second changes that would be worthy of making before moving ahead with a final vote. So what this bill does is it, first of all, it requires all business activity to take place indoors, whether it's within the home or an accessory unit. And it also sets a limitation on the percentage of the residents that can be used, along with a maximum square footage if you happen to have a huge accessory building and a huge home. Preserves the limitation of 1 vehicle, and it also adds a prohibition on parking commercial vehicles on or adjacent to the property. It prohibits commercial delivery services, limiting it to your typical parcel services like UPS, FedEx, private parcel services. That prohibition does not exist right now at all. It restricts any business-related noise from being audible outdoors. That doesn't exist now either. It allows customer visits during certain times of days by appointment only, and it requires that the business owner keep a log of those visits. So it limits the customer visits to 3 per day and a total of, 3 per hour and a total of 6 per day. It strengthens the prohibition of signage and requires that the residential nature of the dwelling and the lot itself both be retained, which doesn't exist now. It requires any goods stored as part of the business be indoors as well. So it's everything that happens is out of sight. It limits any use with customers to 5 specific categories that I'll show you. Removes the requirement that a business owner who never has a client visit, like somebody who sits at their computer and does graphic design, obtain a permit. It says the permit is for the resident and not the property, so that if a property is sold, the permit is no longer active. It says that the permits for the it creates a process for revoking the permit, and it's a very straightforward and short one. And this particular one, and I'll mention that, well, it does limit that the applicant will have to provide an affidavit stating that they are either the owner or long-term renter of the property, and that a property owner can only have 1 permit on his or her properties, no matter how many properties they own, and an applicant can only have 1 of these permits. And it creates a sunset provision, which I know made a few other people comfortable. It says that the law becomes invalid unless it's renewed later in this term. Adds a requirement for affidavit confirming compliance with any bylaws, condo covenants, other contracts and agreements. An affidavit, like I said, showing that your home is, that the home where you're seeking the permit is your primary residence, and an affidavit saying that as the applicant, you're either a long-term renter or the property owner. We came at these by really thinking about what are the ways that this could be gamed sometime in the future, and creating protections around that, even if it's things that are far-fetched now, to ensure that our neighborhoods are adequately protected. So looking at the code now versus what we're proposing, these are things that are exactly the same. It's the same section of code. We're not creating anything new. It's still codes. The business has to remain an accessory use where 80% of your home is your residence, and limits you to 1 full or part-time employee from outside the home. So when it comes to signage, we've tightened the requirements a little bit by saying that not only can you not put up a sign advertising your business, but any kind of exhibit suggesting that business activity is taking place there. is not allowed to get around any creative efforts to indicate business activity. As far as the code's enforcement footprint, again, right now they're charged with shutting down any kind of business, whether they have clients or not, if they don't have a permit. And even if they have a client stop by to drop off some tax forms once in a year, they have to go follow that up. So we're shrinking that burden. And one reason why that's really important, besides the sheer numbers, there's these quotes that you see at the bottom, which were given under oath by 2 of our codes inspectors. They're describing the kind of home occupation complaints that they deal with now. The first one is somebody is noting that they've had complaints because somebody got upset that their neighbor got a new car, or that when they painted their house, they got a few drops of paint on the fence. And they're estimating that a good 40% at least of their complaints that they spend their time on is going to deal with this sort of thing. This other person, codes inspector, suggests that 60 to 70% of home occupation related calls are false complaints, taking advantage of the fact that we're basically criminalizing activity that nobody can tell from the outside is happening or not happening. Under the current setup, the citizen files a complaint and the code's asked to send an inspector out there and take whatever time it needs to observe business activity taking place. Under this law, the citizen will complain, but photos and videos will be accepted as proof that that's happening, absolving codes of taking the time to go out there and deal with that and allowing them to focus on more important things. When it comes to ensuring that residential neighborhoods remain just as non-residential, the current law prohibits non-residential structural changes, but says nothing about what you can do with the lot. And we're adding in that you have to maintain the residential character of the lot, that no changes that are non-residential in nature are allowed. When it comes to vehicles, we're taking the limitation on commercial vehicles and adding the prohibition again on any commercial vehicles being on the premises or on adjacent streets. We're changing the requirement from on obtaining permits, which involves going to codes, from everybody who wants to do any kind of business in their home to only those who are inviting clients. Right now, there are 15,000 licensed businesses in Davidson County. Licensed businesses in Davidson County that don't have the required permit that you have to go to codes to get. So we're codifying what's happening, which again is just in addition to taking the burden off the entrepreneur who's really just tapping keys on a computer, lifting that burden from codes again. Right now, there is no prohibition at all on commercial deliveries in residential areas. As I mentioned before, this would not allow strictly commercial activities, only private parcel services. And finally, we're on to the client piece, which is changing the full prohibition on everything from tutoring and piano lessons to dropping off tax forms during tax season, or an attorney having a client come by and sign a document, by saying that any appointment has to be by appointment and logged, so we know that it's a known person coming into the neighborhood, that the visit's between 8 and 7 on Monday through Saturday only, so you don't have strangers in the neighborhood overnight, and limiting it to 3 per visit, 3 per hour and 6 per day. The idea of all these being that you should not be able to tell whether a person is coming over to do business or just to sit and catch up on their lives. And that's really the crux of what we're trying to do here. The business types that we're limiting here are personal instruction, again with the 3 clients per hour and 6 per day limit, training in the arts, fitness, personal defense, crafts, or other subjects of similar nature, general office, which is exactly what it sounds like, but it has to be non-medical in nature, personal care, which is limited to fitness, beauty, and barber care, multimedia production, which is recording of video and audio production, and artisan manufacturing, which is the design and creation of products like food, bakery products, jewelry, clothing and apparel, pieces of furniture. Again, all within the limitations of no noise happening outside the home and no activity outside the home. This also creates prohibitions on other business activities, whether you have clients or not, like auto repair and scrap yards. So that's what the bill does as proposed. It's undergone quite a few amendments. I've been really appreciative of all the input that we've gotten from the community through all the meetings, and also the feedback we've gotten as a council, and just the countless council members through the meetings that have really been supportive of making sure that this bill was just right. Everybody really understanding that this is something that needs to happen, that we need to allow people to, make non-invasive use of their homes, but also doing it in a way that is respectful of the neighborhood and ensuring that all the neighborhoods that we live in remain exactly what they are right now. So with that, I'll hand it off to Rod or Emily, or however you'd like to go from here.
Emily, just you want to handle the Q&A, or just open it up for that, or we can do that. People that have questions about this bill can
Yeah.
do so now.
If I could make two comments about it, one comment. There are two amendments that are up. Let me back up. There's, Dave, I forget the number. Is it 8 or 9 amendments that have been proposed?
I'm not sure. Most of them were voted down last meeting, so I'm only aware
In committee.
of 3 that are active.
Right, exactly. In committee, most of them were voted down, but 2 of the ones that I support, the first one I think is really important, which would sunset this. And so if for some reason we find, I'm a neighborhood person, it's important that we make sure we don't change the neighborhood. This is something that originally I didn't support. The way it was originally written, and Dave's aware of this, I said to him, I can't support it. And even in the second iteration, I couldn't support it. There has been a lot of change since then that turned my decision around. I've received feedback from over 200 residents in District 7. 20% of those have been custom emails. We get a lot of form emails where people say, click, sign me on. There's been 20% of those emails that are personal stories. And of those, about 5% of them were against, and the remainder of those specific emails were for, where they have different reasons why they support this and want this. I also completely understand the reasons why we don't want this. So I'm here to represent everybody. I'm here to make sure that I'm carrying that to the council. But the sunset is one I think is really important, that if this is not working, let me back up. People are comparing this to short-term rentals and the nightmare that we have in the city, and that many cities have with short-term rentals. What we've learned, and one of the things I think that helped shape the bill with where it is now, are the way that short-term rentals changed our neighborhoods. The intent of this bill is to make sure we are not making those same mistakes. And I think that we've reached that. Let's say, however, that somehow the affidavit that the person owns the property and all of the curbs that Dave just outlined, if for some reason that's not working, I support the sunset, which will make this bill null and void after, I believe, Dave, was it March 1st, 2023, I think?
January 7th. But
it is, it changed to January 7th. That was 2 days ago. So it changed to January 7th, 2023. So if it does not work, then it will phase out, and that's still with the current council body. So I think that we will be able to accomplish that if it's not working, and we make that change. The other amendment that I like is the affidavit, making that affidavit even stronger to ensure that we don't, again, run into people buying up residential properties and trying to create commercial business in them. This is about somebody that mentioned to me, a clockmaker who may have a customer that wants to come and visit, from time to time, and this actually makes that legal for that to happen. So Where I stand with that is, obviously it sounds like I support it. That is where I am right now. I will say that there's always a game day decision on these things, and my mind has changed on certain things the day of the vote. Based on what I've received, both for and against, I try to set the form letters aside. Based on what I've received, I think that this is something that the community wants. We've got more artists in District 7 than most districts around town. I think this is viewed as something that will help those artists. But, you know, neighborhood groups really matter. You guys are one of the most engaged populations. You know, neighborhood groups are one of the most engaged groups within our city. And it's important to hear from you about what you think. And so, you know, I don't know, Rod, how much time we have to hear from everybody, but I want to make sure everybody has the voice. Of course, everybody, I think, knows how to, you know, reach me, but I guess from here I'll open it up.
Sure, open it up to questions.
Matthew?
I see Matthew with his hand up.
Unmute, Matthew.
Unmute, please.
Matthew, you're muted.
There we go.
Okay.
Sorry. No offense, but the sunset provision is a joke. Firstly, the council anytime between now and January 2023 can amend it and extend it. Secondly, there is no way that the council in 2023 will take away the hundreds and thousands of businesses that have been set up between now and then. They'll all get grandfathered in. And just the same thing happened with the short-term rental. We tried to put a sunset on investor-owned short-term rentals and they all got grandfathered in. It's not going to happen. The sunset thing is just a throwing a bone that's really has no more meat on it. That's one point. Second point, I'm concerned that this bill changes over 200,000 houses throughout the city. And I'm not sure it's the way that we need to try to be respectful of neighborhoods and respectful of home businesses. Mr. Rosenberg, are you at all interested in a kind of overlay, a home business overlay that a business owner could apply for and thus change the business owner's property rather than change all our properties to being commercial?
First, I don't accept the premise that we're changing anybody's property. We already allow home businesses in any home in Nashville, and this does not change that. However, the people who this is most going to help are people who are trying to run a side business when they get home, baking or whatever, and trying to put them through some sort of a zoning process, expecting them not only to have the expertise, but the money and time to go through that is not realistic.
That's where the council member comes in. Council members guide us through zoning processes, guide us through overlays all the time. That's what a council member does.
That's sure, absolutely, but there are only about 5 to 10% of people who are really engaged. I would say that the vast majority of people don't know who their council member is.
If you had a business and you knew you could get an overlay for it, it would be an incentive not only to be a good neighbor to your neighbors because you want them to sign on to your business, but also an incentive to know who your council member is because you'd want him or her to sign on to your business, your overlay plan too.
Excuse me, I'm just plugging my computer on before it shuts down.
Or have it.
Again, it's a kind of a cart before the horse thing, is that if you don't know that who your council member is and what an overlay is and all that sort of thing, that's, to be able to run a business the same way you do now, I don't understand why we would want to go backwards like that.
I got a question in terms of enforcement, because as your presentation just said, the neighbors can record video and present that, but doesn't this bill require neighbors to enforce this, become the prosecutors of any kind of violation? They've got to gather evidence. They got to present it to codes. Codes takes action. The affected business can appeal that to the BZA. The neighbor is going to have to go to the BZA and make their case there and present it there. And then if they appeal the BZA with a writ of certiorari to Chancery Court or Circuit Court, the neighbor's got to keep going with that. So who's the burden on there in this case for any kind of violation? Isn't it on the neighbor to prosecute these cases, to marshal all the evidence? And you just heard Sergeant Fisher talking about neighbors not wanting to take action against a guy speeding down the road, putting their lives in danger.
Sure, that burden exists now as well under the current law. It's not ideal, but we're not adding the burden to the neighbor. Under the current law, if you want to make a complaint because somebody's running a home business, you need to complain to codes. You need to file that report against them. And if you're not comfortable using your own photographic or video evidence, you could still ask a codes inspector to come out as you do now. However, we're just adding an option saying that if you wish to do it yourself, instead of having codes come out and be that enforcer, you can do that. And we're reducing the instances of that, freeing up the codes inspectors, because right now they are responsible for the citizen complaints against businesses that aren't bothering anybody. Really the idea is to limit them to only needing to go after these bad actors, and whichever means of enforcement the resident wishes to use, whether it's taking photo or video or asking codes to come out, they can do. But right now, they're responsible for having codes come out themselves.
Matthew?
A couple of things about that. Now is much less burden on code. You can, if someone points out that there is a customer-dependent business in a residential neighborhood, the business is almost always advertising on the internet. The codes person can find it by looking online. Google Maps points out recording studios to me all the time without my even asking. And so they're easy to find this way, and that's all you need to do to establish whether it is a customer-dependent business or not. So codes has a much less onerous job now than it will have after this bill passes. It also really redefines code's responsibility. Code's responsibility is to deal with land use and building. I mean, I looked up what their mission is today. It says that it's the safety of the public as occupants of buildings within metropolitan government Davidson County. It's about better neighborhoods through the administration and enforcement of Nashville's zoning code to ensure orderly development of buildings and property. We are now asking codes to start monitoring behavior, which is not really their job. Your bill will make them monitor behavior when really their job is to monitor what is going on with the use of the land. And so you're adding an extra burden on codes. Codes is already stressed, and it would be easier to do it a different way. In fact, it's easier now than it would be after your bill.
Respectfully, Mr. Bond, right now, if you're asserting that they're responsible for looking for recording studios and that sort of thing, then they're already monitoring behavior, as they are when a lawn hasn't been mowed or any property standards issue.
Those are property standards. That's it. They're monitoring the land use. If you have neglected your lawn, that's also part of land use. That is not the behavior of having too many clients come in and out throughout the day, or working on Sundays, or working late into the evening.
Are they not responsible for anybody running any kind of home business right now, though?
Sorry?
If somebody's running an unpermitted home business right now, whether they're having clients or not, is that not code's responsibility now today?
An unpermitted home business? One that's not getting clients? I suppose it is, but would they ever even bother noticing it?
They are when they're reported, at which 60 to 70% of the time per one codes inspector is what they deal with.
And they see that there are no clients and it's done.
Not if they don't have a permit, it's not done.
Well, okay.
Which there are 15,000 licensed businesses with no permit in Nashville, to say nothing of the unlicensed businesses.
Well, Mr. Rosenberg, isn't it true that there's no possibility that this ordinance will even affect you because you live in a neighborhood that has covenants and deed restrictions that prohibit any use other than as a residential single-family use? Isn't that true?
No, we have at least 2 bake shops, and I know of a jeweler and a woodworker who live in my neighborhood.
So you don't have...
And I work from home, and I have a permit to run an office out of my home.
So you don't have deed restrictions or covenants?
We do have we have HOA covenants.
So you're in violation of your covenants?
I don't know.
Okay.
I asked, sorry, just one little thing. I contacted the, and found the covenant that from Mr. Rosenberg's neighborhood, and you cannot have businesses that invite clients or customers in his neighborhood. You can indeed, what he's doing, and work from home. That's fine. But the moment you ask for customers, that business is not allowed.
Okay, well, I'm not sure if you've run out of questions on the bill and have decided to attack me personally, or exactly what your approach
think-
is here.
Very valid
If
point.
you're gonna propose an ordinance that doesn't apply to yourself. I mean,
Exactly.
I also don't really go to a lot of concerts at Ascend, but we banned smoking there, which I think was a valid thing to do. I'm not in prison, and I believe that we should get rid of private prisons. And I have a lot of constituents who are very supportive of this kind of legislation, and very few contacts in opposition.
well,
I have a question regarding taxing people. Okay, so you're going to let people work out of their home. Are you going to apply taxes to them to do that?
People working out of their home now face the exact same situation as they would under this bill again, and that's up to the
But why,
property
if
assessor.
they're running a business, shouldn't they be paying a business tax?
I think they should, but we don't. That's up to the property assessor, not us. We don't have the authority on the council. I think anybody running a business out of their home should be taxed at a business rate for the portion of their home that's a business.
I got a question on, in terms of just kind of the logistics of this bill or this ordinance. It talks about visits. I think it talks about customers and clients, but I'm a lawyer. And so let's say, I'm going to have a deposition, a very simple deposition. So it's just one witness. So I've got the witness, I've got the opposing party, I've got my client, I've got opposing counsel, I've got a court reporter. If I do it by video, I got a videographer, and let's see, I'm probably leaving something out, but that's 6 already there. But in terms of customers or clients, there's only one that meets that definition. That's my client. None of the other people are customers. They're just invitees. And so they wouldn't fall under the 3 per day or 6 per day limitation that you put down. I think you've got some semantic issues there in terms of the way you're defining that.
Codes has indicated that anybody visiting for the purpose of business would be considered a client or customer for this code, but I'm glad to go over it with them again and make sure that will hold true.
And is there, I didn't see it, or maybe I saw it in an earlier draft about something about there can only be like 1 car parked. Is that right? Something like that?
We got, initially, instead of limiting clients, it limited vehicles, which, in a walkable neighborhood does no good whatsoever. So we changed the limitation to the number of clients you can have rather than the limit on the number of vehicles. And again, so you don't have a car come loaded with 6 people piling into the home.
Well, I'm thinking more of the other side of that coin, or the original part, because if I have that deposition I just described, where I've got 6 other people, including myself, coming, I can park all that on my property, but I'm thinking of like Shelton Avenue over near where Matthew lives. It's a very, very narrow street, and so if you stuff that street with 6 or 7 more cars, and anybody's parked on the other side of the street, you're not getting an emergency vehicle down there. You might not even get another car down there or a big truck. So I think that there needs to be some consideration to the limitation on vehicular traffic associated with this, because a lot of streets, even my street, Brush Hill Road, we don't have any shoulders or sidewalks. So if people were parking on the street, it could become really problematic, especially in some of the hilly parts, because you don't know what's coming up when you move over to get past something like that.
Okay, I appreciate that.
I've
Can I jump in on a
Jeffrey, I've taken that down as well. Jeffrey, thank you for that.
I think we have Logan Key.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Logan Key, live in Laughlin Springs. Jeff and Matthew asked that I come along. I'd like to ask Councilman Rosenberg a couple of questions. I think the conversation about substance is important, and I think the questions that are being raised are very valid. But on process, one of the actually two things that I think are reminiscent of the short-term rental debate in this particular issue, first of all, is that if you go back to 2014 and 15, and you look at the advocates for legalizing and putting a fairly generous framework around short-term rentals, is those people, those council members and community members, were often doing that in the name of protecting neighborhoods. And I think they were probably doing that in good faith, but we look in hindsight 5 years later and we see disastrous consequences. And Councilmember Benedict acknowledged that a moment ago, and Councilman Rosenberg, I think you probably agree with that. And so just because the premise is rooted in a noble effort, I think we had to be very, very cautious when we do something that is so widespread and so consequential and so broadly applicable. And what you don't, and this is where another similarity with short-term rentals comes into play. What you haven't seen so far, and you didn't see this in Councilman Rosenberg's list, is you haven't seen widespread community meetings all over the county to get widespread community input about this bill. There has been a public meeting. It was down at Southeast before the pandemic began. There was a Zoom meeting as well, and there have been some public hearings at public meetings, but there seems to have been no effort to make sure that there's a high level of transparency in every pocket of the county, which is really important for those of us that don't have HOAs, those of us who live in an urban neighborhood and only rely on the zoning code to protect neighborhood integrity and protect us from the things that HOAs protect suburban neighborhoods from. And so, but because we haven't seen that, I think we have to be very skeptical of anything that could cause a widespread change into our zoning code that's applicable to everyone when there doesn't seem to be a sufficient level of transparency. The other similarity you see with short-term rentals is that the people advocating for allowing customers on site are the people who want to have customers on site. What I don't think you see, at least I haven't seen at the public hearings I participate in, are people who don't have a business where they want to see customers advocating that this be part of the fabric of their neighborhood. And until we get to that point, until we get to the point where there is widespread support for this particular concept among people who do and don't want to see customers on site, I think we have to be very, very cautious.
Thanks, Mr. Key. With respect to short-term rentals, those have been disastrous. I was, glad to be a supporter of 608 and things that we needed to do to rein those in. I think, first of all, fundamentally, the difference is that short-term rentals introduced a brand new use into neighborhoods that weren't there before, created a new section of code. It offered the opportunity to bring strangers into neighborhoods overnight with that, in type 2's case, without the owner present, versus inviting known clients over for a short time during daylight hours while the owner is home. The other thing is that if you want to look at lessons learned, that's been the effort, and why you see a lot of real neighborhood advocates in support on the council in support of this bill is because of the protections that we've been able to put in to ensure, work against those ideas. One of the first ideas that came up after the bill was introduced was, how could somebody game this and decide to buy up properties and make our housing crunch even worse? Which is why we created the limitations on, one property owner. An LLC cannot own a home where one of these permits exists, and a homeowner can't own one home and another home and have permits in both. And the person, well, maybe they could get somebody to just kind of rent the place and say that they're the applicant. So we added the long-term renter affidavit and as well, or being somebody who's on the deed or closely related to somebody on the deed. So those were the things that we took from short-term rentals, and recognize that even though this is not a major change, although I know for a small subset of people, this is a major thing. But for the vast majority of people, people are surprised to learn that this is a big deal to anybody. That's been the majority of the feedback I've gotten, and why we haven't had that level of, people screaming at us to do this, or frankly, to not do this. The other thing that's been kind of interesting as we've gone, and one other thing along those lines is that that what you saw with short-term rentals when it was being advocated for were well-paid lobbyists for, you know, coming in and backing people up to the door with people to come and speak in support of this, and put in, you know, running ads on Facebook and elsewhere promoting short-term rentals. And you're not seeing that because this is not a big moneymaker for people. This is, you know, people aren't all going to suddenly quit their jobs and decide to, you know, leave their careers and start new businesses in their homes. This is something that's already in our homes and that is non-invasive. And we're giving people the opportunity to come out of the shadows and do it without the threat of shutdown over their heads. And I think that there's a lot of value there.
Thank you. Back to Matthew.
Okay. Although the affidavit is something, nothing really stops someone from owning a house and basically using it as a business and not living there. Okay, and because it would be almost impossible for neighbors to prove that you don't live in a house. It's very hard to prove that someone doesn't live in a house if they collect their mail there. And it wouldn't be hard for a husband and wife who wanted to own two houses, have two businesses running, each one in his or her own name. So it's still going to mean that it encourages investor ownership, perhaps on a smaller scale than we see with the short-term rentals, but it's still going to happen. And it's still taking houses off of the market that could be affordable housing. Whereas if instead of changing everyone's zoning, changing all these zonings, making this huge zoning change across the entire city, you do it as an overlay process, it would be very difficult for an owner who doesn't live there to get an overlay because you would need the neighbors to line up behind you. You would need to know them already, and the neighbors would know if you weren't actually living there. So I really, out of the weaknesses in this bill, the biggest weakness is the fact that it's so damn big. I mean, the number of zoning changes like this since I've lived here in 25 years is one, and it was the short-term rentals. There's no other zoning change that has gone across the city like this. So why can't we substitute a bill that works on an overlay process rather than this huge change?
First of all, I appreciate you reminding me, Mr. Bond. There's also, this bill also requires notification of all neighbors if somebody applies for one of these permits. But it's been really, you know, I know that you've been using the term zoning change as frequently as possible, but it's not true. Home businesses are allowed now. Neighborhoods will remain residential uses with an accessory use of no more than 20% of your property as a business. It's just not true.
Okay, what's the purpose of notice to neighbors? I mean, if they object, is code's going to deny the permit?
The idea came from another council member, and it wasn't something that I was gonna fight for or fight against, but they felt like neighbors should know or should be able to know if they want, you know, just as a courtesy, that they were gonna be continuing to operate a business.
Okay, so it doesn't have, there's neighbors get, just like we get notice of a, you know, my neighbor here wanted to do a really steep roof, and so we got notice that they were going to do that for a exception with BZA, but you know, we could have gone and objected to it and raised the stink, and BZA could have turned them down. But I mean, in this case, it's just, you just know, okay, now I know that this guy's going to open up a business next to me, versus all of a sudden discovering it one day when there's, you know, 6 cars parked out front.
If there were 6 cars out front, they'd be as in violation of the law as they are today, but otherwise, yes.
I guess in terms of, I'm trying to think of terms, if this thing goes through, how can a neighbor be better positioned to enforce this? And so, you know, in that sense, I think one, I think where people are going to complain is the number and frequency of visits. And you've got this log system in place, but who's to say that these people just don't falsify their log? I mean, what if they just falsify it? There's no harm there. I mean, nothing there. So I would want to see that this log be like a sworn declaration or something along those lines, so that if a neighbor can produce video or photographic or testimonial evidence that they had 12 cars there, and he says, well, I only had 3, and his log says he only has 3, then the neighbor can say no, and then and then that would be basis to yank their permit all the way across the board. And then on the front end, I think it would be, and I don't know why we didn't do this with short-term rentals, but we really should, is require proof that these people have registered with as a business for payment of Davidson County business tax and state franchise and excise tax. Because I guarantee you there's a ton of SDRs out there that aren't paying franchise and F&E tax. So, and then to renew these things, have proof that they've paid those taxes. If you're going to be a legitimate business, you've got to sign up for everything.
Appreciate that, Mr. Miller.
Councilman Rosenberg, you mentioned this would allow the Coast Department to focus more on bad actors, and I question the premise of that. But taking that as the premise, what do you mean by bad actor? And in other words, under your bill, would a bad actor be somebody that sees a customer at 7:30 at night, or somebody who sees 7 customers a day? I mean, what do you mean by bad actor?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. So I would say that right now you have people who are operating businesses that are what I'm calling the invisible businesses, that under our current regulations aren't allowed, even though they're not bothering any neighbors. What I would consider a bad actor is somebody who is bothering their neighbor. And by creating a framework by which we make legal the types of businesses that are not impactful, and clearly define what's expected and what's allowed. It's kind of like, to go off on an analogy I might only get, if you've got an interstate highway and the speed limit is 65 and people drive 70 or 65 or 70, you're giving them a guideline. But if you set the speed limit at 5 miles an hour, people are going to go 120 miles an hour. So by creating these guidelines and then having the opportunity to call people who go outside those guidelines, not only are you limiting people who code has to deal with there, but you're allowing people to have a clear set of rules to play within, as opposed to just deciding these rules are absolutely absurd, what we've got now. We can just do whatever we want and it's all the same level of illegal.
And then I have one more, I guess, quibble or whatnot with the scope of this bill, and that's in terms of.
Excuse me a second, Jeff. Howard's had his hand up for a while. Perhaps people haven't noticed.
Yeah, I saw it.
Could you hold off, Jeff, for just a second?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've heard a lot of conversation. I've read part of the bill and all, and I appreciate what Dave and Emily are trying to do to kind of keep us all in line here and keep things running smoothly. But in my opinion, that we have way too many laws and too many rules and regulations now, and that this is just going to make us a lot more complicated and make life a lot more complicated. So, I'm not sure it's something we really want or need as far as I'm concerned. If this makes life hard to deal with, and talking about keeping logs of visitors and things like that, it's probably not going to happen. You really get down to it, it's not going to happen. You won't be able to enforce it. So I think we need to fall back and regroup and look at some other more simple things to control what you're trying to do. This has just got way too complicated. So I, for one, am not in favor of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my in terms of the scope of the businesses that are permissible or expressly permissible under this, I think it talked about spas. What is a spa? I think of, like you know, a massage therapist and a, acupuncturist, maybe even, and I don't know, maybe that's considered medical. But I remember when I was a kid growing up, down on 8th Avenue, there were all these massage parlors, and it was, kind of an open secret. You go there and you get your happy endings. And so now this sort of allows that into neighborhoods on a small scale. So, I'd like to see spas removed from the scope altogether. But that kind of gets back to, I remember reading, the Beacon Center was kind of pushing this topic maybe 2 years ago. There was a lawsuit, and it was about home recording studios and hairdressers. And so, if that's really what we're trying to legitimize, then let's just legitimize them only and nothing else. So that, okay, so you're going to have a recording studio subject to these limitations. You're going to have a hair salon subject to these limitations. But to include spas and all these other artisanal manufacturing or whatever is in there, I don't know what that is. I mean, could you have a lathe? Could somebody do, have a giant wood workshop and build stuff like that? I mean, I think you could under this bill and the way it's written. So, if you're evil, so to speak, that you're trying to correct is to allow recording studios and hairdressers, then let's just say that. Let's get very, very narrow and say just that, subject to these limitations.
So as far as woodworking, if it's less than 20% of your home and there's no noise outside, then yes, you could do that. So when I introduced this bill last year, what I was trying to get at was primarily three things: tutors, music teachers, you give like piano lessons and that sort of thing, and people who do professional services and need to have a client come by for a short period of time. It wasn't too far into the process before I heard from studio folks, and I was vaguely familiar that they had the bill back when it was the one in the term before mine, but I wasn't following that at that time. But they weren't the target here, and they have plenty of complaints about this bill because it wasn't written for them, and nor were hairdressers. The idea was to get after folks who do personal instruction at home. Like I said, the piano teacher and the tutor, and then the general office. But as the conversations went on, it became, why be so, what's the legitimate basis for just saying that these completely non-invasive uses can operate, but somebody can't make chocolate chip cookies in their house and put them out on the front porch for someone to pick up every once in a while, which I've done during COVID since not going to a bakery. And so that's how we ended up where we were now. That was generally the planning department and codes department came together and sent a list of suggested uses that they would find non-invasive and appropriate.
Other questions? Okay. Well, Dave and Emily, thank you both for agreeing at our meeting. Let me finish. I think we know a little bit more about this bill.
There's one more, Rod. There's one more question.
I'm not going to ignore that. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Rod. I just want to say thank you to Emily and to Dave Rosenberg for coming tonight and being part of this meeting. I really appreciate it. I know that I've heard some negative reaction to this bill, but to me, it just looks like it's finally a way to put some structure around something that has no structure. And it gives people who live in the neighborhood, if there's abuse, it gives them a solid remedy. And it actually protects the neighborhood rather than harm the neighborhood. And I'm in favor of this. I'm in favor of this. I have a lot of friends who are musicians who want to teach students and do things like that. And I think this is good. I hope it passes.
Thank you.
Ron, if I could, I just want to make sure everybody knows to please contact me. And I will tell you, the form letters stink and I read them. And the only ones that I track are the ones, like I read almost all of them. The only ones that I track are the ones that have a legitimate, verifiable District 7 address. And I do track those to see what is their opinion. So form letters are fine if you want to send them, but I very much prefer hearing the personal stories that we hear through these meetings. I want to make sure everybody knows how to reach me, which is, Matthew, that's not true. You've been doing it on Twitter, which is not the same as email or call. I'm going to go ahead and put my phone number in here. I think everybody already
Your
has it.
voicemail messages too, Emily.
Well, you're right, and I responded to Melissa. You're exactly right, and that's correct. And it was during budget, but you're exactly right. And so I just put in my phone number and my email address. I very much appreciate hearing from everybody. And Matthew, I'm glad to call you back. I thought we had already acknowledged where I was and where you are. But I am always open to talking with you anytime.
Emily and Dave, thank you for doing this, but I do feel like what we're lacking is a metro-wide community informative meeting. I don't think a lot of people are aware what is going on. And you do have a lot of gated communities, people that are not affected by it, but we have a lot of historic neighborhoods, very close together, limited parking. People really need to know about this, and we should not move forward until it is very open to the public, where people can have a chance to speak and are able to educate themselves about this.
Thank you, Ms. Coleman. I appreciate that. I mean, it's been 9 months, and I know council members have been informing their constituents about it. And I'm really happy with the engagement we've got. And thank you, Rod, for the invitation. Thank you, everybody, for Emily and y'all for being here tonight and sharing your thoughts and asking questions and having this conversation. I enjoyed seeing y'all.
Thanks.
Anything else, Emily, any wrap up to that? Okay. Well, first thing I want to mention is thank Jeff for hosting our Zoom meeting. He's been very good about that, getting everybody lined up. Is there anything anybody else in the neighborhood needs to mention before we say goodbye? Anybody else, any of the other members of the steering committee, anything we need to share?
Just that I think we're going to have the people with the the Avery, Nashville, at the corner of Inglewood Court and or Inglewood Drive and Gallatin.
Okay.
They'll be next month.
That'll be for our August meeting, correct?
Right.
Okay. So yeah, we'll hope to either see you or in person or see you on Zoom in August. Any other committee members, anything else from the steering committee? If not, we'll call this a meeting and now more than ever, shop local. We always have pushed that idea, and so now is a great time to show the merchants in our neighborhood how much we appreciate them. So if nothing else, we'll adjourn our July meeting. Thank everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.